Welcome back to MotoringBox. I'm Sean McKellar, and today we're going to be tallying up the costs of everything I had to buy to get this AU Fairmont Ghia turbocharged. You're watching MotoringBox, proudly supported by Century Batteries. Now, from the onset, I just have to warn you, this is not a budget build. I wanted to get this thing built a certain way. I wanted it to look factory correct, so we've got a lot of used XR6 turbo parts on here. So do bear that in mind when it comes to some of the choices for parts and just what I spent my money on. So straight away, let's talk about the engine management. I went for a Haltech Elite 750, which is a really small ECU. It's about the size of my hand. It's even smaller, in fact. As it turns out, it's actually really easy to install one of these with a piggyback loom. So I bought a Haltech Elite 750. I got a custom-made piggyback wiring loom from Bill Hooton from Hooton Harnesses. I've got a wideband box, a wideband O2 sensor, and also, what else? Oh, a triple channel igniter. So $15.99 for the Haltech 750. The triple channel igniter was another $270. We need that to utilize the stock ignition system. The Haltech WB1 box and the Bosch O2 sensor kit was another $459. And then the custom little patch harness from Bill Hooton was another $350. So straight away, that's pretty much everything you need to convert your AU Falcon to an aftermarket ECU and then have it run properly. That's what I did for quite a few months. After I installed it, I ran it NA and it got the car up and running, and it's then sitting there ready for when you want to take the next step. And in fact, I even have a Haltech tuning file on my website, if you go to the link up here in the corner, that you can download and install onto your ECU and get your AU up and running if you want to install that ECU. Once you have a custom ECU running your engine, you can then install bigger fuel injectors and enter that data into the ECU and still keep your engine running. You can't do that on a stock ECU. So that is what I did next. I went for the Bosch Raceworks 1000cc injectors. So these are a really good size injector for a 4-litre engine like this if you're going to turbocharge it. So I upgraded the fuel injectors. They were $599 for 6 of them. We also put a XR6 Turbo, a BA XR6 Turbo fuel pressure regulator into the stock AU rail. They plug and play, they fit properly. That was another $48. That makes the fuel pressure rise from 2.7 bar, which is, I don't remember how much PSI that is, but it goes up to 4 bar, which is 58 PSI. Something like I think it goes from like 38 to 58 PSI or something, don't quote me, but it gets the fuel pressure up to what a standard XR6 Turbo runs. So yes, $48 for the FPR. And then from TI Performance, I got a 460 litre per hour fuel pump. It was a kit which Jason at TI puts together in limited quantities. The pump is in the whole housing, the hanger and everything. You literally unplug your old pump, drop the new one in, plug it in, it's ready to go, plug and play. So that pump was $558. He gave it to me half price because he had seen the videos, he wanted to support the project. So big thumbs up, TI Performance. On a side note, they sell pretty much everything that I've used here, bar a few small little things. So he's actually set up a page that has most of the parts that I run, and it just helps you work out your pricing and sort of how much you're up for dollar-wise. Although this video is going to help you with that too. So either way, it'll help you figure out how much it's all going to cost. The pump is quiet. The injectors, again, have really good low RPM idling manners. There's not really any downside. Once you get the Haltech configured properly for all of those parts and pressures, the car drives stock. So awesome. So from there, I wanted to jump in and then do the turbo conversion on this. So I initially decided from the onset, I wanted to do a BABF spec turbo setup, the whole crossover piece, the turbo manifold and everything. So I didn't have any of these parts, and they can actually be quite expensive to buy through Marketplace individually. So I went to a wrecker and I said, give me a BA XR6 turbo spec exhaust manifold, intake piping, so the crossover, the hot and cold side piping, the dump pipe as well, and the first section of the exhaust, because I wanted the sort of downpipe, the cat, and then, you know, we'll merge it into a custom system later. I think that was all I got. It was really just the exhaust manifold. I already had an intercooler, which we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, those parts alone cost me $1,200, which is a lot of money, but They are getting to be a little bit rare, a bit thin on the ground, these parts, as they didn't really make many turbo cars in the first place, if you believe some of Ford's build figures, but that's another story for another day. Even like the exhaust manifold alone, they can go for around $450 to $500 on Facebook. In Queensland, you usually don't see them any cheaper. So I needed one of those. Crossovers alone can be like $150 or $200. An exhaust with a cat, again, probably a similar amount. Intake piping and whatnot can be quite troublesome to source through eBay and through Facebook. So it cost me $1,200. I think it was an all right deal when you add it all up. And again, it saved me a lot of time rather than sourcing them individually. Got them all at once and happy days. But yeah, hurt the wallet. To fit that exhaust manifold to an intake though, yeah, it doesn't bolt up. So you need a 6-boost manifold adapter. That was another $209. It includes the studs and the nuts to fit it all up, which is a really cool thing. Highly recommended, and it just means that you can run any Barra exhaust manifold on an intake. As part of that, I got a titanium stud kit. That was for bolting the turbo to the exhaust manifold, but also bolting the dump pipe to the back of the turbo. It's like a kit you can buy, which includes titanium studs and titanium nuts. And it just means that the fixings for those items are brand new and you can torque them up nicely. They apparently hold their torque. They don't sort of loosen up over time. That remains to be seen. That was another $98 for both of those together. And then I didn't buy a used factory XR6 turbo Garrett turbo. I decided to go for a Pulsar turbo. It was a 3584R Gen 2. And that was another $980. So I went for that because, you know, turbo technology has improved over the years. It's got a larger inlet on the front of the turbo, more fins. Like I think it's a much more efficient turbo than the stock Garrett that was, you know, on these cars or on the BA series turbo cars, you know, 20, 25 years ago. I think the stock Garrett ones were 3-inch diameter on the inlet. This is a 4. Also with that turbo, it doesn't have a vacuum nipple on the front for your boost controller and your wastegate setup. So again, we'll talk about that later, but you could save yourself a lot of hassle if you went for a stock Garrett turbo and even then bought a Pulsar replacement core, which you can get for like $600. Then all of these parts would just bolt up and you would have a brand new turbo essentially if you replace the core and probably replace the wastegate too. So it's horses for courses whether you pay the full, how much was it? $980 for the turbo, or do you rebuild a stock one and then pay for a new wastegate actuator as well? And you know, it's up to you. I just decided to go for this option and I'm really happy with it. Brand new turbo. Turbo is a big part of this build obviously, so that matters. So from there, I also ordered a banjo bolt kit. This is for attaching the oil feed for the turbo. There's a little oil feed down the side of the Intech and Barra, for that matter, block. Funnily enough, the Intech VCT has its own oil feed coming from that location already. The oil pressure sender is also coming out of that same connection. So I bought a banjo bolt kit. It's literally just the banjo bolt and the fitting for you to then buy an oil line and attach it to that. That fitting was $52. So from that, of course, you need to buy an oil feed line kit. That was another $67. It's a Mamba branded one. It suits Barras. The kit also included an oil drain, which was good. It had a fitting which bolted up to the turbo oil drain location. That was fine. It had a rubber hose, but the fitting they provide with that doesn't bolt straight up to one of these. If you have an NA Barra, there's like a little location on the sump ready to go, which is cast in that you can drill out and then attach that feed to it. But on an Intech, no such thing exists. You need to buy a fitting, which will then attach to that oil drain kit. And then, yeah, touch wood, it has not leaked since. So it fits up with the oil drain perfect and happy days. So at this stage, you pretty much have everything to bolt an exhaust manifold turbo to the side of your engine, have an oil feed running to the turbo and an oil drain running out of the turbo. So of course, we needed to then get water in and out of the turbo as well. There is a kit from Custom Alloy Welding. They have a water feed kit which basically attaches to these water hard lines. There's one that comes out of the thermostat housing here at the bottom. You can drill a hole and it's got this fitting that kind of clamps over the water line. Gives you a water feed to the turbo, and again there's another one that you drill for the hard line that's down the side of the block here, and then you can feed water back in. So that kit, it was another $372, and at the very least it solves the problem. I had issues with some of the water lines not being long enough, so if you're going to order one of those, definitely tell him what exhaust manifold you're going to run. I think mine was built for an FG manifold where the turbo's in a different spot. So tell him what manifold you're running, and then yeah, he will size the length of the water lines to suit that. We then have to plumb the turbo, I guess, from both ends. You've got the cold side coming from the airbox through the crossover into there, but then you have the hot side coming out of the turbo towards the intercooler. So for $149, you can buy, it's called a B-Series Hot Side Turbo Kit. Plasma Man sell one, but also you can get them really cheap on eBay, which is what I did, $149. It includes all of the piping and joiners needed to get the charged air, I suppose, coming out of the turbo, down below the engine, up to the inlet port of the intercooler. I already had a stock B-Series turbo intercooler. They can be had for about $50 to $100 used. They're not really anything special, and I think if you're running anything up to 300 or low 300 kilowatts at the wheels power figure, it'll be fine. So for this build, it's all we need. I had it for free, but again, yeah, $50 to $100. I'm not going to include that in my budgeting just because I already had it, but pretty easy to get, pretty cheap. From there, we have a few random things that I needed. I needed to buy a sheet of exhaust heat shield. It's like a sheet of metal, perforated metal. It's got like a pattern in it, very similar to the stock heat shielding, which I then cut and sort of folded and put it over the engine mount, which is sitting under the turbo. The stock turbo cars from Ford always had a heat shield over that engine mount, just because they do have a lot of rubber on them, and the heat from the turbo perishes that rubber faster and wears it out faster. So I built a little shield out of a sheet of that heat shielding. The heat shielding itself was only $42, and I've got a ton of it left over, which you can use for other projects if you want to. To get the crossover installed on the engine, there are two mounting points on top of the intake manifold here which match up, but the stock turbo motors actually had these nylon or kind of rubber standoff spaces, if you like, that space up from the mount to the crossover and holds it in the right spot. So I didn't have any of those standoffs, so I went on eBay and I found some nylon ones in two different heights. I'll put the heights on screen because I forget at the moment what they were. I needed a slightly taller one for the front mount and then a slightly lower one for the rear, and that sort of angled the crossover exactly on the right angle. And then I went to Bunnings and found a bracket which I could then bend and make for the mount, which sits on top of the rocker cover here, which I've got costed separately. But anyway, the nylon standoffs together were $25. There was like 10 of each size. The stock AU Falcon expansion tank, this one over here, is not going to work because the main sort of hose that runs to that comes out of the bottom, and that puts it sitting right on the side of the turbo. So it doesn't work. You need to get a BA or BF spec coolant tank like this one here. That costs another $56, and that has a port that comes out the front. The other two sort of coolant hoses can run straight to the top. There were two outlets on it, just like the AU tank. You needed the BA spec tank hose as well, which then goes into the front of it. That was another $30. So that takes care of the cooling system. Everything is now done on that. To fit the crossover to the stock AU airbox, I needed to get an SY Territory intake pipe, this rubber one here. They are a little bit longer than the Falcon one, and I did need a little bit of extra length to reach the airbox. It's not ideal. The fitting that hose attaches to, you have to modify it. You can sort of cut out the inside of it just to get a bit more diameter there on the internal size, but that's free, it's just time. But yeah, the SY Territory intake pipe loosely clamps up to it, you know, tight enough, so it's good enough. As part of the crossover install and also the intercooler install, I bought a whole lot of alloy flat bar from Bunnings. You can get 1 meter lengths of it. I think I got 30 mil by 3 mil, so it was a little bit wider but fairly thin. Also got a smaller one, I think it was 12 by 3 by 1 meter. All up, I paid $40 for those. Then, you know, custom bent them, drilled them, cut them to mount the intercooler, and also, yeah, a tiny little mount for the crossover. There is, as you can see, there is a bit of DIY to get these parts to bolt up and fit up, just because, yeah, you're talking Barra versus Integ. They're quite different, even though they do share some similarities. There is a bit of a difference there too. I also went to Bunnings and bought a whole lot of clamps. Actually, some of them were from Bunnings, some of them were from Supercheap. I spent about $60 on hose clamps. We're talking about for the throttle body, where this hard pipe goes to the crossover, where the cold one bolts onto. New clamps are good, especially anything after the turbo where it's pressurized. Get a new clamp on every fitting because you don't want to be chasing boost leaks later on down the track. And also part of that same kind of idea is the silicone joiners too. So I had to buy a new one, a 3-inch one to fit here onto the throttle body. Let me list them out. So the crossover to the intake pipe on the cold side, this one at the back here, is a 3-inch. Where the cold side intake pipe goes into the front of the turbo, I had to go for a 3 to 4 inch 90-degree angle. So it's 4 inches on the front of the turbo, it goes to 3, and then you can cut your intake pipe to sort of go into that joiner, 2 new hose clamps to then join it up. The turbo to the intercooler piping, I had to actually buy a 2.5-inch joiner, but it's on a 67-degree angle, just because the turbo outlet was pointing at the side of the frame rail. I apologize, I'm going a bit quickly through all of this, but I hope the video on screen sort of shows what I'm talking about. We've got the intercooler piping to the intercooler. That's because the hard pipe kit was a 2.5-inch diameter. I think the inlet on the intercooler was 2.25 inch. So I had to get a 2.5 to 2.25 joiner to join that pipe to the intercooler. And then we've also got 2 little block-off pieces on the crossover for where the blow-off valve is. I'm not running a blow-off valve, so there were 2 holes in that crossover there that I had to block. So they were 2 1-inch end caps to block those off. And then finally, I got a new joiner here for the crossover to the throttle body. That was a 3-inch. I think the official size is like 3.15 inches. So it is a real struggle to get that one on, but once you do, it's never gonna leak. So all of those together was about exactly $195 for all of those joiners, but you've got new joiners on everything, new hose clamps, it's worth it. For the boost control, I run a 3-port Mac valve, so that's a really cool option. I run that on my BA turbo as well. You need to run some vacuum line from the nipple on your turbo to that Mac valve and then to the wastegate. But my turbo, as I talked about before, if you buy a Pulsar turbo, it doesn't actually have a vacuum or boost nipple on the housing itself. So you need to install one somewhere. So I found a member, they call it a silicone hose vacuum nipple fitting adapter. And you drill a tiny hole in one of your silicone joiners, you install this little nipple adapter. You can then run your boost or vacuum hose from that to the wastegate, to the 3-port Mac valve, then run another vacuum line to your wastegate. So the Mac valve was $60, the nipple adapter was $45. I've got a panel filter in here. It's called a Fram Air Hog panel filter. It's from the States. You can buy them locally. $60, so not too bad, but very sporty, hopefully flows well. No complaints so far. The engine runs okay, so must be all right. If you're on a budget, just use your stock filter, should be fine. And then finally, I had to get an exhaust put on this thing because we were just running the stock first section of a BA turbo exhaust. So it's just got a cat and then it was just straight pipes exiting under the car. So they are a stock twin 2.25 inch pipe. I then got an exhaust shop to join onto that into a 3-inch. So it goes from twin 2.25 to a single 3, goes through a muffler and a resonator and then straight out the back. It's in 409 stainless, so it wasn't the cheapest. It was $1,300 for that work to be done. But really neat system, should never rust. You know, we have a lot of issues with these Falcons, the AUs in particular, that have that tilted muffler. beside the spare wheel well in the back. So the fact that it's all stainless now, it should be good for life. So that is really all of the parts that you need to turbocharge your AU Falcon. And as you can see, it looks completely stock. This was what I was going for. There are different ways you could go about it. If you wanted to go for a turbo side intake, relocate the battery, run a pod filter, you can obviously get rid of the crossover, you can get rid of the airbox. You then have to run different intercooler piping. You have to run through an intercooler that then goes all the way through, like a flow-through intercooler, rather than a reverse flow that goes back like mine. You'd have to have one that goes through. You'd have to have intake piping that comes up under here, zips around to the throttle body, and you have a completely different looking setup. So if you're turbocharging one of these, it's really up to you what you want to do. But anyway, if you go this way and you buy all of the parts that I just bought, it's going to cost you $9,060. So I did warn you at the start that this was not going to be a cheap build. It's a $9,000 proposition. If you do all of the work yourself and you were just buying parts at retail, that is what it's going to cost you. There might be a few sundry misc items which I might have forgotten, little vacuum hoses or anything you need or any parts you need along the way to make it all happen. Luckily I had everything I needed, but be ready for something to come up and to have some extra costs there. So it cost me $9,060. Realistically, could be 10 grand. When it's all said and done, it could be a 10 grand car. But
not a bad way to spend $10,000.
So when you consider that this car cost me $2,500, you're investing 2 or 3 or 4 times that figure into turbocharging it. And that's why I think a lot of people don't do it to this kind of degree. They go for cheap turbo kits, lots of used parts, China turbos, J3 engine management, which is in itself is not bad, but it's a different price point. So it's up to you what you really want to do, what you're hoping to achieve. If it's just all on a budget, go that route. But if you want a car that you're proud of, well, that I'm proud of, this comes from my logic, then be prepared to spend the money. So from here, we do have a few extra things that I'm going to need to spend money on to get this car 100%. The first one is obviously you'd probably want it dyno tuned at some point. I've done all the tuning myself. So again, this is like an extra cost that would come into your build if you can't do it. I've sort of learned a lot about the Haltech ECU and the tuning software over the years and how you tune engines and do that. So I'm really interested. I've picked it up over time. So that has saved me a lot of money. I've been able to get this car running happily on 5 pounds of boost. You know, everything works as it should. The idle, there's a lot of things that goes into a tune. It's not just simple. There's a lot of factors when it comes to how the engine idles at different temperatures, how much fuel it needs at different temperatures, how much fuel goes in at certain throttle actuations, like you stab the throttle, you need to inject extra fuel. I could talk for hours about it. There is a lot that goes into getting a car just running right in day-to-day driving. And thankfully, I've got the skill to have been able to do that. But do bear in mind, at some point, I do still want to get someone to tune it properly. So it's probably another $900 to $1,000 minimum to get that done. So we will need someone to look at that in the future. And also the transmission is the last thing that you need to factor in. If you've got a T5 manual, the only thing you need to worry about there is how the clutch and the box is going to handle the extra power. They apparently don't like much power beyond stock. Quite weak gearboxes, apparently, allegedly. With that 4-speed BTR that I've got here, because the Haltech is piggybacked into the stock ECU, that stock ECU is running the gearbox. So it is still doing these comparatively slower shifts for comfort. When you're on 50% throttle at the moment, this car is really shifting along, and then the gearbox doesn't shift quickly enough. It kind of like lurches and you have to let off the throttle for it to finally shift, because the logic is obviously set up for, well, expecting to do a much more comfortable, slower shift at that throttle percentage at that speed. It's not expecting all this extra power, and it needs to be able to shift faster, but it doesn't realize that, right? So we need to spend money to fix that. There's 2 options. there's a Shift Kit's manualized controller, I think they call it. You wire it into your car, and it just means that every time the gearbox shifts, it shifts really hard. It's like a shift kit. Instead of slowing the shift, it kind of goes boom, boom. If you're cruising, you would kind of feel it every time it shifted. And a byproduct of that is you have to use the shifter yourself for every single shift. If you just put it in drive, it'll try and take off in 4th gear. So you manually have to put it back to 1st, take off, and then cycle through the gears. And literally any time you want it to change gear. So there are pros and cons. Like, that'd be awesome to have that much control over it. The box is not going to shift unless you tell it to. But yeah, the fact that it'll be shifting hard even when you're cruising and you have to tell it to shift every time, that's kind of the downsides to it. That is one option though. The second option I'm looking into is a J3 chip, which some people use for tuning and running modified intake engines, turbocharged, supercharged, or even just trying to get more power out of an NA. But those little J3 chips can be used to tune the gearbox behavior, because that's controlled by the AU ECU2. You can use it to up the line pressure to get quicker shifts, but also based on the RPM or the throttle percentage, you can decide whether it shifts slow or hard. So in theory, you could use one of those J3 chips to keep the gearbox logic and good quality shifts when you're cruising, but when you go over a certain throttle percentage, to really ramp up that line pressure and get those sharper, crisper shifts. So in theory, I'm looking into that option because it could mean that you leave a lot of the gearbox logic alone. It's just that when you're on boost and you're in those higher throttle regions, that it'll just quicken up the shifts. And if it can do that, that'll be perfect. So I'm going to try and wrap this video up. Otherwise, I'm just going to be here for hours talking about this whole conversion because I love this thing. When I look at it, even just looking at it now, I can't believe I've got an Integ VCT turbo. It looks like it rolled off the line from Ford. They should have made it, they didn't, but I've made it. And that alone, you know, this car has gone from being my least favorite car in the fleet to being one that I never want to sell. It's just, I think it's the fact that I've done it all, most of it myself, that I'm just incredibly proud of it. And yeah, I don't want to ramble too much, but this is a worthwhile conversion. If you've got an AU Falcon and you're thinking of selling it, just because you're a bit sick of how slow or thirsty it is, a turbo conversion is actually a really good way to breathe literally new life into your car. Yeah, so that's it. If you've got any questions, literally do ask me, because I always check and read every single comment. Put it in the comment section below if you're tackling this yourself or you just want to know the answer to a question. If you're thinking of taking it on, just ask it. I'll reply to literally any question that goes down there. If I can help you out and I can help my Ford brothers perform this conversion on their AU or E-Series or anything, you can do this on a BA too. It's a lot easier. Put it in the comment section below. I'll be more than willing to help. As always, really thank you for your support. You know, even the fact that you just sat here and watched this video is supporting the channel. If you want to, if you got something out of it, throw me a like, subscribe, anything helps. So I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching. Have a good one. Put your comments in the comment section below. I'll see you next time.